Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to talk about writing about religious beliefs and personal conflict. Now, we're pretty far into the semester right now, so we're going to gloss over the normal things, except to say that if you are looking for help with your writing, you are more than welcome to come to the ACU Online Writing Center, where we have appointments that you can make to talk with someone in real time via phone or Zoom. Or you can schedule an asynchronous appointment where you sign up for a time, send us your paper by the time that time rolls around, and then we'll send you feedback via email within 24 hours. With that, let us dive in and take a moment looking at our goals for today. So our learning objectives. First, we're going to explore and understand the argumentative essay genre. We're going to look specifically at an assignment in our FAMO program, looking at the stress and conflict paper, which requires that you write an argumentative essay that uses a couple different types of ingredients. And then we'll finish with a discussion about taking the assignment instructions and starting the drafting and outlining process. So let's talk about argumentative essays. Now, an argumentative essay is an essay that is designed to persuade the reader of something. Could be a particular perspective, valuation, position, voting, but the unified element here behind this persuasion is that it's going to use evidence, logic, and argumentation. Now, this usually unfolds in a three-part structure where you have an introduction where you set up what you're going to be writing about in the paper, where you introduce the topic and your thesis. And you include an outline of the major content that you'll be discussing in the order that it will be discussed. And then moving on to the main body of the paper, you'll generally have at least one paragraph per main idea. It depends on the length of the essay, but one paragraph is usually the minimum. And then you have your conclusion where you wrap things up and say, okay, and here's what should happen next, or and here's what this means together, or let me remind you of the major points of my argument. Now, an argumentative essay, we can contrast that with some of the other major essay genres. If an argumentative essay emphasizes convincing the reader using evidence and logic, persuasive essay is also trying to convince the reader, but mainly using feelings and emotions. Now, this isn't to say that a persuasive essay can't be powerful. There are many things where those emotions and feelings are key to understanding someone else's position and that this is something that they care about profoundly. And certainly I've seen many persuasive speeches given that followed the persuasive essay format. But it's one way of making an argument, and it will not convince all people. And the argumentative essay is, in part, a way of making a essay to convince the reader that is trying to minimize the subjectivity of those feelings and emotions by leaning primarily on giving evidence and logic. Now, a narrative essay, by contrast, that has the main focus of relaying a viewpoint or an experience to telling a story, if you will, usually a story from a particular perspective. And a descriptive essay emphasizes educating the reader, telling them about something. And there the goal isn't so much to convince them of a position as, okay, learn some stuff about this. So our argumentative essay assignment that we're looking at today is going to be trying to convince the reader of something. Let's take a look at what that is. But before we go into that, let me make one point. Although personal feelings are often more of an element in a persuasive essay, they can be used in argumentative essays. You can reference and describe these, and you can do that in APA style as well. But just keep in mind that you should generally be contextualizing and discussing any of these feelings that you give, and not just using them in place of an argument or using them unassisted as the basis of your argument. So for example, if you just had, I felt this was very unfair, that really doesn't tell us if your feeling is merited or not, or even if it's something important. But compared to, oh, I felt this was very unfair, so I tried to convince my colleagues that this needed to be rectified as suggested by author date. What this latter example gives us is it relays, yes, there was this feeling, and this feeling led to an action, so I tried, and the action was in line with the recommendation from the literature. So here we have something that instead of just being, well, I felt this, which is persuasive to some people, but not as persuasive in the genre of an argumentative essay as if we couple it with these other things. So I tried to do this, so cause and effect, as suggested, okay, lining this up with the literature. And so we go from, all right, so this just happened to, all right, this happened and it led to this thing, and this action was done in line with recommendations. Now, when you are describing your own feelings and beliefs, make sure that you use I statements, that you use personal pronouns to clarify that you were talking about your particular views and beliefs. I believe that, I define. So let's take a look at the Family and Marital Counseling 262, Week 5, Assignment 1, Stress and Conflict paper. Now, I'm sure it's no surprise that families that we're born into and families that we marry into can have a lot of stress. That is one of those highs and lows things that goes with any sort of intimate relationship. So this particular assignment begins with the preamble, and I've slightly reformatted the information on the assignment page without changing any of the content. It begins with this preamble where it states the purpose. Students will be able to identify various stressors and their impact on relationships. Additionally, students will articulate a personal view of how forgiveness should be applied in conflict. Now, although this is the preamble to the assignment, it's giving some hints at the kinds of things that should be discussed in this essay. And so while it might be taken as, well, this is what we want to exit with, I would say this is also very good advice about the kinds of things that your professor wants to see you writing about in the paper. Then we move into the main instructions. Think of an intimate relationship in which conflict is clearly present. This relationship could be found within your family or friendship circle. You could also choose an intimate relationship from a sitcom or dramatic show. So you are not limited to writing about your own life and those around you. You could write about a fictional one. And in some cases, that is a very helpful thing to do because it allows us to more objectively discuss. So whether that's something where you're drawn to examining something out of your own life or something in a fictional one, the point is to be able to describe the conflict and to analyze it. And in some cases, a TV show might be helpful because you can go and rewatch it and refresh your memory. And you rarely do want to relive those dramatic moments in our own personal life, but you can do it with Netflix or a DVD or whatnot more easily for a fictional one. All right. In a 600 to 700 word paper, describe the conflict. How did it begin, the direction it has taken, and the outcomes of the conflict? Using that same example, articulate a Christian worldview of the role of forgiveness in conflict. Now, 600 to 700 words, that's not a ton. That's roughly 2.5 to 3 pages. Figure a double-spaced paper using our template is going to be around 250 words, so roughly 2.5 to 3 pages in length. All right, so we want to be pretty organized about this to make sure that you do all the things that you need before you run out of space. All right, and you're asked additionally to explain at least one new idea or question that you have about stressors, conflict, or forgiveness that has not been previously considered. Okay. Now, this could be read as an isolated thing, but if you can connect that to the conflict being discussed, that will be helpful because it'll give more continuity to your argument and more of a clear reason for why they should be being discussed together in your essay rather than just, well, the instructions that I had to mention that. And then normal note on being formatted according to APA guidelines. If we look at the rubric here, we see, okay, identify and explain stressors in intimate relationships. Well, that is definitely something that we want to make sure is done. You'll note that that particular breakdown is not in the main part of the instructions, and so we will want to make sure that that is clearly articulated. Address the beginning, course, and outcomes of conflict. Okay, looking at this, begin, the direction it has, and the outcomes. Yep, so that's the first bullet here. Articulate a personal Christian worldview of forgiveness. So that is also in that first bullet, but we want to make sure that it is discreetly discussed. Addressed ideas and questions about stress, conflict, and forgiveness. That's the second bullet there. All right, and then just a reminder that you should be following APA style and be making sure to proof and edit your work. Okay. Now, there's some things to keep in mind before you embark on drafting and outlining your paper. We want to make sure that you're responding to each prompt directly and then following up with more detail, using the language of the prompt so that it's very clear, and in this case we'll say the language of the rubric as well, that you are listing the stressors and you're not just saying, oh, this relationship is this, that you identify it as, oh, these are stressors in the relationship. Use consistent word choices to refer to the same thing. There are many synonyms for stress, but let's make sure we use the word stressor when you're referring to those. Use the rubric and instructions to come up with approximate headings and organization and length, especially because this is only around 2.5 to 3 pages. We want to make sure that you do everything that you need to first. And then anything in instructions, treat as requirements. So when it says, this relationship could be found within your family or friendship circle, you could also choose an intimate relationship from a sitcom or dramatic show. So these are our 2 examples here. Unless you are writing the professor to get specific instructions and approval, I would not go and adapt a situation from a novel. You're given family or friendship circle and sitcom or dramatic show. Let's stick to those. Now, if you are, when you're discussing your religious beliefs, if you're referring to the Bible at some point, make sure to follow the APA guidelines for citing and referencing the Bible. And also, if you're relaying your own religious beliefs, those will again be I statements. And unless you happen to have published a description of your beliefs that other people can access, you wouldn't be including a parenthetical citation for that. Now, if you are citing documents, say a church website or faith statement or something like that to explain part of your beliefs, you can certainly do that. Just follow standard APA citation practices. So author date and then a reference entry. So for example, if you were Methodist and you're referring to the Book of Discipline, all right, well, as an active Methodist, I subscribe to the beliefs described in the Book of Discipline, citation, United Methodist Church, 2021. All right, now, if you are drawing on some material, not in your own life, your friendship circle, but you're drawing from film or TV, we want to make sure that this is cited and referenced accordingly. So I've included here examples for how to cite and reference a film. And TV series is, if you're citing the series as a whole, you'd use the first format here. Well, you see there's a date range. We don't do date ranges very often in APA style, but you do for TV series that run more than a year. But more likely, you're going to be referring to a specific event in a discrete episode. And for that, we're going to have a reference entry for that specific episode. You can see an example here from The Mandalorian. And the citation will be for that particular year that the episode first aired. So, if we're citing this episode of The Mandalorian, Favreau and Filoni, 2019. Alright, with that, let's move into drafting. And if you haven't grabbed a copy of our AP course paper template now, I do recommend getting one so you can follow along. Now, I've gone ahead and taken a copy of our AP course paper template, as well as copy and pasted the assignment instructions verbatim into this document to start. And I'm just going to go ahead and italicize all of these. Now, when there's something that I feel has been taken care of or is distracting to include, I'll go ahead and cross this out. So paper should be formatted according to APA guidelines. That's basically all the assignments, so we don't need to worry about that. Some people will even go ahead and they'll use the highlighter tool and just highlight that in black so that they're not even really looking at that. Now, we'll want to go ahead and compare the instructions to the rubric really quick, and that brings us to how this is described in the rubric as the course. So I'm going to put a little note in there in bold, and then if you look at the rubric, you'll see that there is a reminder about the different stressors. So that very first item in the rubric says, student identified and explained stressors in intimate relationships. So we want to make sure that that is something that is listed in the outline so that you make sure you do it and get full credit. So looking at this here, you can start breaking this up. And so when you are starting this, you may have the specific conflict that you're going to describe in mind, or you might just be parsing this out. In my case, I'm thinking of a particular example and saying, okay, the outcomes of this conflict. My friends are now Now, often we'll write things down in a shorthand, and then but you want to make sure you go and align that thought with the wording of the prompt. So, my friends are now unfortunately facing a divorce. That does describe an outcome, but it's not as clear that you are doing that specific thing being asked as if you write, the outcome of the conflict is that blah. Or the major outcome. I can list all those things out. And so by using the italics for the original prompt text, and then using a sub-bullet in regular non-italicized text, then it's very quick to see, oh, that's where I'm putting this set of details. Now, when it comes to the Christian and worldview, this is where your particular beliefs might come in. And let's say you were writing as an evangelical Christian. And when you're listing things, you might be having something where you're referring to biblical scripture. You might be referring to a faith statement or other materials produced by your denomination, Or you might be stating your personal belief. And if it's going to be stating your personal belief, I statements. If you're going to be citing scripture, well, we have that method here. And if you are referring to church documents, you cite it just as you would any other source. All right, so when you are diving into these, it's important to go ahead and make sure that you have covered everything. So, let's see. After reviewing this situation, I have several new questions about how to mitigate stressors in intimate relationships. You don't have to have all the details, all the ideas when you are just starting to write this. The point is to give yourself a framework to understand exactly what you need to write about and how it fits together into the argument, and then when you do sit down to write, that you will have all the ingredients that you need to write effective paper. And that does include knowing, okay, I should actually wrap up this thing, so conclusion. Let's make sure that that's formatted correctly in APA style. And okay, we should have an introduction here. And describe the conflict. You divide this and say, okay. Now, when you are formatting, make sure that your headings follow title case in APA style, which means any word with 4 or more letters gets the first letter capitalized. Now you can go back and start describing the specific conflict that you've chosen, and knowing that this is going to be around 2.5 to 3 pages in length, you've got an idea if you're going too long in any one section, or if it's about right. Okay. I think that's a good point for us to wrap things up here, so let's just review what we've talked about today. So we began with a discussion of the argumentative essay genre. Then we looked at how this contrasted specifically with different types of writing that you might be doing, like persuasive essays, narrative essays, descriptive essays, and how you can use personal feelings as part of your argument, as some of the evidence, but it shouldn't be all of the evidence that you're using. So contextualize it, talk about how it's important and any cause and effect, and if you can contextualize it with the literature, especially to justify or support a choice of action, great. We talked about how to write about personal beliefs. We talked about the specifics of this instruction and how there are some details about what to be writing about contained in the preamble, the purpose section, and also specified in the rubric to make sure that you go and identify and explain those stressors. Now that's a good point for us to go ahead and check our outline here and make sure that there is a section where those stressors are specifically identified. And that's something we can go ahead by adding it now, make it much easier to make sure that that's done and that you don't accidentally skip it over when it comes time to finishing and submitting. All right. If you are using a TV series, you're probably going to be referencing a particular episode rather than the show as a whole, so make sure that your reference and your citations are the same. You can include citations for more than one episode, especially if it's something that's split across or had ramifications later. Just make sure that you get those dates right. So if it's something in the same year, you might have 2019A, 2019B, 2019C, etc. And with that, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu or visit our website. Have a great day, everyone.